Phil Akman, are you well?
I'm very well in this sweltering hot far north Queensland Cairns Friday morning.
Oh, well, you picked it. You're living in paradise.
Well, I'm certainly not living in paradise for Australian universities, many of whom have plunged in the just released gold standard Times Higher Education World University rankings, Jeremy.
So why would we slip? What suddenly has happened to our tertiary qualifications, our standards?
Well, let me give you an idea of some of the $93 million worth of cutting-edge research projects undertaken by Australian universities, which may go some way to answering the questions you've just posed. So, for example, Sydney University has just received or just been awarded almost $4 million to identify the missing link in global movements of multi-species justices using innovative musical approaches to communicate the urgency of climate change.
Which means what?
I don't have the faintest idea. But what about this one? Critique the contemporary phenomenon of humane-sounding exclusion of refugees. $1.3 million.
Good God. And who's coming up with these titles or these areas of research and the money? Who's behind
it? Okay, so what's happening is that the Australian Research Council, there used to be a political veto over the top of the projects that they deemed were sufficiently important and cutting edge to receive funding. But late last year, the federal Labor government decided that politicians should stay away from the decisions that the Australian Research Council made. And the latest round, which are now identified, is probably the first fruit of that new approach. But I mean, there are plenty of others. For example, what about this one? $460,000 for the University of Queensland to identify the causes of gender bias in the staged English language translations of ancient Greek tragedy.
You couldn't get anything more obscure than that, could you?
Well, I mean, I think it's a burning issue that's astonishingly being ignored by overseas scientists who seem to be fixated on astrophysics, biochemistry, artificial intelligence, the outer limits of fluid dynamics. I mean, shame on them, I say, and their sad attempt to extend human knowledge.
Phil, I think there's a modicum of cynicism. Les Alicus, by the way, at the table. A modicum of cynicism on your part, and everything you've mentioned tells me that there's absolutely zero commercial value to any of this crap.
Oh, no, I think that's a bit, never accuse me of being cynical. Not the world. Let me give you another couple of real rippers. Over $1 million, I think this is important and it's a worthwhile subject, to understand the role of mobile media in grief rituals.
What?
Dad died, here's the text message. $1.1 million.
$1.1 million.
Or what about this one? Explore games and play-based activities to engage a range of citizens in setting the agenda for climate adaptation and policy. $500,000.
Yeah, well, the world has gone totally mad, barking mad, I would say. What do we do, Phil?
Well, what's happened? I looked at the latest world rankings. They came out just a couple of weeks ago, yeah. And the top 10 include, most of the illustrious American universities, and also Oxford and Imperial College in London. You get all the way down to number 39 before you get to the first Australian university, which is the University of Melbourne. And then 20 places further on at number 58, Monash. And in the top 200 universities in the world, Australia has 10. So that means 3/4 of Australia's 39 universities didn't make the top 200. In other words, they're fighting it out with the University of Kazakhstan.
So, Phil, where did Adelaide University or Flinders?
I thought you might ask that.
Yeah.
Adelaide University came in at an illustrious 128.
And last year's result was what?
I haven't got last year's result. I mean, there are 2,800 of them. I pulled through this year's results without comparing university by university. But Flinders and the University of South Australia both slotted in somewhere between 301 and 350 from the top.
Now, when you think of the money that we spend on education and the high regard that we hold education in, I mean, these are sort of the sandstone universities. These are the prestigious ones, aren't they?
Well, they are, and I mean, I think one of the poster children here is the Queensland University of Technology, which fell from equal 199th last year to somewhere inside the top 250 in the latest rankings. Now, once you get over 200, they just clump them all in batches of 50, I guess, to minimise embarrassment. And there hasn't been even a whisper whether Queensland University of Technology should stick to its guns over last year's decision on their part, which I applaud, to remove all references to merit in their hiring policy.
Really?
Yes. I think that's sensible.
So what's the criteria?
Well, I don't know. There'd be pages and pages of considerations. I'm going to speculate diversity would be up there, quotas would be up there. Yeah. These are important elements, and merit's neither here nor there. And I think that's a good idea because we're not very good at merit in Australia. We should step away from it.
Just ignore it. It'll go
Phil,
away.
The reality is that the most meritorious, illuminating illustrations of universities are from the United States, and they are the most woke institutions on the planet.
Well, I think Australian universities, based on the research that I've been peering at over the last few days, would certainly be competitors for that. But just pursuing the topic of merit for a moment, I think this is also important, and I applaud this. The Australian Education Unit has been reported in the last few days. They've imposed work bans, again sensible, on reforms designed to help children learn under the Better and Fairer Schools Agreement. Now, this boycott stops teachers switching to evidence-based instruction, phonics, for example, which have been discovered by pesky researchers overseas to accelerate literacy. And evidence-based instruction has now been, I think, bravely accepted into the Australian system. It confronts our more traditional model, which I assume is based on no evidence at all. If you fail to notice NAPLAN's test results, which show about a third of 15-year-olds in this country are effectively unable to read, write, add up, or subtract.
Phil, I've got Dr. John Bruni also at the dining room table. He's going to be another voice you'll hear.
Oh, thanks, Jeremy. Listen, having been a lecturer in one part of my career, I must say that I was in the system as I saw it starting down this particular path, and it was getting worse when we heard rumors that people were doing PhDs based on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We thought that was a hoot, but the topics that you had made mention of earlier, they're just absolutely hysterical. But I think that what we have to really address here is, yes, the universities are a problem, and they have been for quite some time. But also, if you look at it from a lecturer's perspective, most people from my generation, and I will say I'm in my late 50s, we came from a system whereby our schooling structure supported us and prepared us for higher learning, whereas the schooling structures that we currently have here in South Australia and elsewhere in the continent are not necessarily kitted out for preparing children for higher learning. And the reason why I say that is, even when I was doing my lecturing, I had to, when I got my first group of, first-year university students through, I realized they can't write sentences that are complex. They can't do anything.
They can't read and write.
It's a failure of the system. So it's no wonder we're regressing at a rate of knots. I mean, what are we expecting here? The only thing that university administrators do these days is bully academics into meeting these quotas. Mm-hmm. Many of the academics that I know that are still in the system absolutely hate what they're encountering, but they like to have their job, so they don't make any waves. And who stands for quality education these days? Well, no politician does.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think a couple of observations about that. I mean, in Victoria, they're grasping the school education problems that you're referring to. There's a strong push now. And again, I applaud this. I think it's a sensible move to reduce the school week to only 4 days a week. Mm-hmm. So instead of 5 days a week, 5 or 6 hours a day, whatever it is, 39, 40 weeks a year, it'll be 4 days a week. Now, what I don't understand about that is one of the explanations as to why teachers can only be at school for 5 or 6 hours a day has been that children up to the age of a higher school certificate, when they're 18, just don't have the energy to be able to concentrate for more than that. But if they go back to a 4-day week, that means presumably the kiddies will have to concentrate even harder. So I just don't get that.
No, I don't know if you've heard, Phil, that the teachers' unions say that in support of their campaign for a higher salaries, they will refuse to teach the phonics. Now, they now know that their full word recognition approach to reading was a failure, and they've accepted the fact that the direction they should be taking the kids in is to sound out the words, which is how I learned to read. As a better system. Now they're saying, well, we're not going to do that unless we get our pay rise. So they are weaponizing.
I mean, it's the kind of leverage. That's the kind of leverage that I like to see. Yes. The future of our kids up against higher salaries for teachers. I think that's only sensible.
Weaponizing kids. Yeah, I agree with you. You know, you and I haven't talked since I got the sack from 5AA.
Hasn't the Brittany Higgins, we've got to be careful what we say, but hasn't the Brittany Higgins story moved on?
It's still going. Yeah.
I think the most important thing that's come out of that came out of Justice Michael Lee's decision in the disastrous defamation action that Bruce Lehrman brought. And I read the entire judgment. Now, this is based on the balance of probabilities, but the net of it is, I think, in some ways sad. What's happened is that consent has become so complex now that it's almost impossible to understand when you actually have it. So, for example, based on the Michael Lee judgment, if the partner, presumably in almost all cases the female, is drunk, then, as I understand it, at law, she's now incapable of giving consent. And no matter how encouraging she might be, because she's under the influence of alcohol and therefore not capable of giving consent. And what that means that by definition at law, any sexual contact with a female who's drunk is defined now as rape. Now, the problem with that is, just imagine you go to any venue, let's assume you go to a bar or a nightclub or anywhere where there's alcohol, really, they ought to be obliged at law to put up a sign, and that sign should say, look, attention males, because mostly this is aimed at males, they're overall the offenders in this situation. Attention males, there will be females likely present in this venue, and alcohol is present, and if any female has had a drink and she chooses at any stage over the rest of her life to make the accusation that she had sex with you while she was drunk, it will be up to you to prove in a court of law that even though she'd had a drink, it wasn't enough to impair her judgment.
Yeah. Lewis, I'm so glad I'm the age I am. I tell you what, I wouldn't like to be a kid these days.
Well, I think
a kid tempted to go back for his hat.
Well, I think, and you know, perhaps I'm over-egging it, but I think not. I think we're heading to a kind of sexual apartheid where any kind of interaction between the sexes is so dangerous that actually it's best avoided altogether.
Yeah.
You've got so many issues now. I mean, the other issue, I mean, there's been a very brief federal government advertising campaign. It's been, so far as I can tell, on social media. And it's a 30-second ad. And what it does is have, a boy and a girl, and they're posing questions. And the questions are things like, how do I know when I've got consent? Or how do I know that the consent is good? And they don't answer any of the questions. What they do is refer you to a government website, which I dutifully went to. And the website is sub-menus deep with endless complexity in these issues. It's become such a complicated subject now that it's incredibly difficult to ever have the confidence you've got consent. For example, what is continuing consent? Is it I ask you every 20 seconds or every minute?
You got to keep checking. Yeah.
but is it by time or is it by event? I mean, I hold your hand. Is that an event? And now I kiss you on the cheek. Is that another event? Or is it every 2 minutes or every 5 minutes? And what I have to try and speculate on is what a court years later might find appropriate.
Oh, God. Phil, listen, can we talk again?
Oh, we could.
Yep. Look, I'll bother you down the track. No, I really miss our chats. You know something about just about everything. I love you dearly. Thank you, Phil.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
All the best to you, sir. Phil Akman. He is an absolute gem. He's absolutely wonderful.